You've heard all about becoming an expat and you think this might be for you. You understand that Latin America could be a really great option for you and you want to investigate it further, and you've heard what we've said here and other places, of course, that it would be great to go out and do a survey of different areas around the regions that you're interested in potentially expatting to or becoming a digital nomad in, and learning more about them very broadly so you can make really good decisions about finding the right country and city for you. And so you want to do a survey living time period around Latin America. Well, I'm Scott Allen Miller. I've been an expat for more than 13 years, and I love helping people find the right place that makes them happy and gives them a better life going forward. I live in Latin America. I live in one of these countries in this region, relatively in the middle. I've lived in multiple. I've been all over. And today we're going to be talking about what I feel are the four most important, the four ultimate countries for surveying life across Latin America. So if you want to go out and put in a bit of time, whether it's 1 month in each, 6 months in each, or whatever, and you want to get a feel for what the region might be able to offer you, in no particular order, we're going to go through these four countries so that you can start making a survey planning journey of your own to help you make a long-term decision about the right place for you in Latin America. Very importantly, nothing on this list is a priority order, and nothing on this list is a recommendation for a country to be the right place for you. These countries that we are going to present for you are picked not because they are perfect locations. They are picked for a number of reasons. One is that each one is highly indicative of its general region that it represents. Two, all of them speak Spanish and will give you a general feeling for the region as well as their individual regions. Three, all of them are affordable, so if you're not looking to spend outrageous amounts of money, you should be able to afford all of these for at least a survey period under normal circumstances, so you won't be in a position where you're going to a place that's super expensive and then realizing that it's not really an option for you. These are ones that will be options for everyone. Four, all of these are very safe countries or offer regions that are very safe so that you have the ability to do so without ending up in a position where you could be in real danger. Some of these countries are safer than others. Some are very safe as countries. Others, you have to go with safe regions within those countries. But these are not big problems, and they're important things to consider when you're looking, especially at first moving to a country. And five, all of them have strong tourism infrastructures that may be really developed or partially developed, but all of them will make it relatively easy for you to be able to spend a bit of time, both because of their visa and passport allowances, assuming you're coming from North America or Europe. Most countries will be able to go to these countries pretty easily. They all have well-developed roads. You'll be able to get around. All of them have well-developed internet and infrastructure, so if you need to work or do anything like that, you'll be able to. We're just going to move in geographic order. Again, not a priority in any way. You could do any of these in any order. But at number 4, we're going to start with the most obvious choice and get it out of the way. Ben, a lot of you know automatically what this is going to be. The largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, not just in Latin America, is Mexico. Why is Mexico important? So first of all, if you're going to be in the North American region, Mexico represents essentially this entire region. It also has Caribbean coast, Gulf coast, and Pacific coast, as well as a bay. It has mountain areas, desert areas, jungle areas. It has resort areas. It has small villages, giant cities. You can get essentially anything in this very, very large, highly developed country. Mexico is the most dangerous country on our list, and it is the only one that we really have to worry about safety and planning around safety. So in Mexico, there are giant swaths of the country that are quite dangerous, but there are even bigger swaths of the country that are quite safe. And so you have to do a little bit of planning around that, but we can dig into Mexico, and there's lots and lots of very safe options. Remember, it's a very big country. The regions that are safe within Mexico are easily larger than entire countries that are safe that we will look at in other regions. It's important to note that Mexico is, at the time that I'm recording this, by no small margin, the most expensive country on our list. And it will potentially take a little bit of planning if you want to be in Mexico, get the things that you want, and stay stay at a generally affordable price point compared to the rest of the region. But Mexico has so many offerings in so many different places that depending on what it is you're looking for, you'll be able to find it in Mexico, including affordable, safe areas. Not a problem at all. Mexico is iconic, it is dramatic, and there's nothing else that is going to represent these super large Latin American countries as well, and nothing else is going to represent the North American cultural zone within Latin America as well. So Mexico is very important, and a lot of people will simply point to and talk about Mexico when talking about Latin American travel or relocation. If you skip Mexico, you'll be leaving a gap in your knowledge of the region, and there's no other country that can come close to giving you a feel of what Mexico is like. So it's important to include Mexico unless you have the ability to simply rule it out. But if you're going to do a survey of the regions across all of the different parts of Latin America, then Mexico is an absolute must. It's a beautiful country and it has so much to offer. While we're talking about Mexico, I want to talk about this additional part of your decision matrix that you probably need to do before you start doing a survey of these countries. And that is deciding what it is you're looking for within those countries. Because every country we look at is roughly going to offer more or less the same things. They're going to offer coastal living areas. They're going to offer countryside. They're going to offer small villages. They're going to offer big cities. Now, some of them offer mega cities. Some do not. But knowing that you're looking for an urbane environment, knowing that you're looking for really low cost, or maybe you're not worried about the cost of living, knowing that you're looking for a lot of tourism infrastructure, you want to be around a lot of expats. Maybe you don't want to be around expats. You just want to be in areas with locals and you want to be more ingrained and a part of the local culture. All of these places that we're going to talk about offer all those things. You could, in all of them, go to, and almost every country in the region, right? Because we're looking at a large number of countries. We're just choosing 4 that give you really good indications so that you can hone in. And in many of these cases, we're not saying that these are the right countries within these regions. We're simply saying that this is the country that makes sense for most people to start within a region before they branch out. And of course, you could pick a different one within each region and get relatively good results, but these I feel will give you the best overall across all of Latin America. Choosing that you want to be in a big city, choosing you want to be on a farm, choosing you want to be near the water or up in the mountains. Do you want a warmer climate, a cooler climate? Make those decisions as best you can ahead of time, and then evaluate as best you can similar regions across those countries. That will be important because if you pick Mexico City while you're in Mexico and then to the next country go to someplace really rural, you are going to be evaluating, whether you intend to or not, something very different than what the country may offer you in both places. And instead, you'll be comparing the country to the city. And you'll say, well, in Mexico, there was so much food. And in the next country, there just wasn't. And you're like, well, yes, because one was Mexico City and the other was just some little village in the middle of nowhere. So you want to compare apples to apples as best as you can, because that will give you the most useful information. So Mexico is our starting point. It doesn't mean that you need to start in Mexico. It's just the first one on our list. Again, there's absolutely nothing about this list is meant to be ordered other than we have 4 countries to get through and we want to track where we are on the list. At number 3, meaning it's the second most northerly country on the list, is Nicaragua. Nicaragua sits in the middle of Central America and is reasonably quite some distance from Mexico. It is far enough away that it is not heavily influenced by Mexico beyond the amount that Mexico influences everywhere in Latin America. It has a different linguistic profile. It has a different cultural profile, has a different historic background. It feels like a very different place. And for those who don't know my show, we are filming this episode in Nicaragua at this time. Nicaragua is the very, very safe country and is the safest in its region. And being in the middle of Central America, it is both geographically indicative of the area. It is worth noting that of all the countries in Central America, it is the most low-lying. So it's the warmest rather than being the median warmest. So you can extrapolate all the countries around it will be at least a little, if not rather a lot cooler. Guatemala being a lot, Honduras being just a little. But other than that one thing, Nicaragua really gives you a very good feel for the region, both because it's geographically in the middle and in reality it is the most iconic of the countries in the region. When people picture Central America, they are most likely picturing Nicaragua if they're able to picture something in the region at all. Many people cannot, and so it may be a big adventure for you. But being a very safe, very low-cost country. You can learn a lot about Central America while in Nicaragua. And because the Central American countries are not that big, if you're going to put in any amount of time, it's actually quite easy to travel from Nicaragua to every single country in Central America, not just the other members of the CA4. If you're not familiar with the Central American 4, check out our video. Hopefully I will put the link up that takes you to that and talks about what that is, because that is a shared border zone and you do want to be aware of that if you're in the region. But also it's not that hard to reach Belize, and you can definitely very easily get to neighboring Costa Rica and to Panama, which technically is not part of Central America, but does share an awful lot with the region. And all of those can be reached by bus, by simple flights, by car, and in some cases, I know people who've bicycled through all those. So it's very well situated to give you on its own a really good cultural introduction to the region, but also geographically, it's perfectly situated to allow you to explore many countries within the region. Should you decide that that's a region that you're interested in, you can survey around it very quickly. And I think of all the places in the region, within the Central American region, it is the one most likely to end up being your final destination. It just has so much to offer, and of all the countries we look at, it is the easiest for an expat to move into. Just the mechanisms of allowing an expat in at the time of this recording, it ranks #1 really across all of Latin America. It's worth noting that Nicaragua, of all the countries we're going to talk about, is the only one that does not have a mega city. So if you're looking for the really large urban environments, Nicaragua will not have this. So if you are not picking city or country or small village, and you're picking megacity, then you're going to need to alter this particular recommendation. If you're looking in Central America and you want that megacity, it's going to give you the same kind of feeling as a Mexico City, then almost certainly you have to go with Guatemala City. And that's just a special case. Super large cities are not available in every country. However, Latin America is very good about having super large cities, the exception of Central America and Panama. Panama's largest city actually isn't that big, but it gives a very urbane feeling, so a lot of people are okay with it because it feels like a big city, even though it is relatively small. But other than that, Nicaragua is your best bet for the region, partially because of its safety and cost profiles make it just so much more attractive to someone who's doing a survey. It just gives you more power and flexibility and comfort while doing a survey, rather than a country that's nearby, where you may be spending a whole lot more, like the southern Central American countries, or maybe having a little bit more need to manage your safety like the northern Central American countries. Right now, El Salvador is doing very well, so if Nicaragua doesn't make your list, personally, El Salvador would suffice very well as well. Very similar profile, very safe, relatively cost-effective, a little bit more expensive, but in a much smaller region and not quite as centrally located, but it's still going to give you a really good option. So that is something to consider as well. And they do have a city that is more urbane than Managua, the biggest city in Nicaragua, but it is definitely not on par with Guatemala City. And #3 on our list is the first country in South America, at least the first one that we're going to come to on our list, and that is, and I'm sure you're going to guess, Colombia. Colombia is important because it sits in the center of what was the Grand Colombia Zone, which now is Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela. Being in the middle, it gives you automatically kind of the most indicative experience, and it is the largest country in the region, so it tends to hold most of the median things, median experience, and it makes it easy to live in different parts of the country and have a really good feel for what countries nearby may be like. Over time, the countries of Grand Colombia, like Colombia and Venezuela, and Ecuador and Panama, have diverged quite a bit from each other. So Colombia and Venezuela, for example, are today rather different from each other. Living in them will give you very different experiences than compared to like Nicaragua and Honduras, which are much more similar, or even Nicaragua and Costa Rica, which may be the two most disparate countries within Central America, still are relatively similar. But Colombia to Ecuador, and especially Colombia to Panama, are pretty varied. So you're looking at a little bit less indicative of the entire region, but it still gives you a decent feel. Colombia is incredibly iconic. It is very low cost of living. It has some really giant cities like Bogota and Medellin. It is a major destination for expats. It has a lot of infrastructure of every type. It does have some danger. So like Mexico, there's areas to avoid, but it also has large cities that are very safe, and you can easily choose to be in those places. So not a problem. Unlike Central America, Colombia gets very high altitude, so you actually get relatively cool weather. Even though you're getting really close to the equator, it's really not a problem in the majority of Colombia. But if you want that super warm Caribbean feel, you have access to that as well. Colombia is a big country with a lot to offer, and it's hard to imagine evaluating Northern South America without Colombia being at the middle of your list. Now, some people are going to argue that Ecuador has become such a hub for expats that maybe it's a better choice. And you have every reason to make that argument, and I would accept that Ecuador is a perfect second choice within the region. If you don't want to do Colombia, or it just doesn't work out for you, or you just feel a really strong draw to Ecuador, that would be a great alternative. You're not going to find it to be so dramatically different. And if you are, very specifically looking at Ecuador and its surrounds rather than Colombia and its surrounds, just in case there's a specific mix that is drawing you in one spot or another, then yes, Ecuador may make a lot of sense. But I think for the vast majority of people, unless you have a very specific need, Colombia is just going to be that perfect fit for Northern South America for most people. It's a great country with so much to offer. At number 4, our final country on the list, and this one is difficult. We don't want to put in too many countries, and we had to skip quite a few. And of course, every single country throughout the region and in many other regions are amazing with so much to offer and could be a great option for you. Again, in no way does this list meant to tell you that these are the countries to choose from. These are countries that help you decide which next countries to evaluate, which regions to evaluate, what it is you want out of your Latin American relocation and expat and digital nomad experience, right? So I just want to be really clear about that. In no way are these recommendations for these specific countries in your final move. They are the decision countries that help you best make that decision for the final move. There are so many great countries that we're ruling out because they just don't give us enough of survey information to really meet our needs. And if there's a place that's just really calling you, of course you should go there instead of one of these or in addition to one of these. That being said, our number 1 pick, our 4th country on the list, country number 1 is Argentina. Why Argentina? Of all the possible options, including Chile and Uruguay and Paraguay and Peru, there's Bolivia, there's so many places that you may have picked because you've heard so much about them. They're very popular with expats. They seem to have such a great mix for you. Why Argentina? Especially given at the time of this recording that Argentina is in the middle of a financial crisis and can be very difficult to navigate because of its monetary issues. Well, Argentina represents a completely different face of Latin America. Of all the countries in the region, Argentina is the most, and I use this term delicately because I hate to use it as a way to describe a place, but it is true, and it is how nearly every Argentinian I've ever spoken with has described themselves, but they are a European country. Argentina sees itself, for all intents and purposes, as being a remote European country, much as Haiti is often described as being an African country that is located in the Caribbean. Argentina is often viewed as a European country that happens to be located in the southern hemisphere. When you go to Argentina, everything from the way that stores are laid out to the way that people look and dress and interact to the way that fonts are picked and interior design is done will make you feel like you're in a Paris or a Madrid or possibly a Rome and maybe a Kiev or Bucharest. You have a very, very European feel in architecture, in city design, urban planning, in interior design, apartment layout, and the interactions of everyday life. You really can fool yourself into thinking you're in Europe anywhere in Buenos Aires, which represents a huge percentage of the overall population. Argentina lies in the temperate zone in the south, and so it is actually farther from the equator for the majority of the population than Mexico is, which really throws people off. Buenos Aires, which is in the northern half of Argentina, is the same but negative latitude as Dallas, Texas. So most of Argentina lies the equivalent of in the American Midwest zone, all the way up to basically the Canadian border at the extremes. Argentina represents a significantly different and dramatically different pace of life, timing of life, food, cuisine, music, nightlife, dancing, lifestyle, cafe culture than basically anywhere else in Latin America. It is the most dramatically different, I believe, of all the countries that you could be investigating. And so it's important to consider it, because there are many people who are going to look at Argentina and say, this is so different than everywhere else in Latin America. This is what I'm looking for, and nothing else is going to come as close. And you may not realize that there's something like Argentina out there making such a dramatically different offering. It's easy to suddenly forget that you're in Latin America when you're in Argentina, because it is so much like being in Europe, until you realize that the seasons are switched and the time zone is crazy. But Argentina is a giant country physically that offers a lot of smaller cities and country living. It is extremely affordable at this time. Historically, it has been quite expensive, but right now it is very affordable. So that is a current draw for a lot of people. And generally, its paperwork is considered to be very easy for someone who is looking to spend a long time there or become a permanent resident. It's very welcoming, partially because it's a very large country and has the ability to handle a large number of expats without really impacting the local culture. So some places like Nicaragua on our list are very small, and a huge number of expats moving there would be impactful, both positive and negative. But in Argentina, it is much more difficult for expats to be impactful to the general population, and so they're just able to welcome more people. They're located so far from places that people would immigrate from that they're just not a big target for immigration, and they're not on the way to anything. They are at the end of the world for all intents and purposes. So by including Argentina, it is very easy to get an incredibly good feel for the Southern Cone. Argentina represents the majority of the population in the Southern Cone. So anything median or mean that's going to happen is going to be in Argentina. If you're in Argentina, especially Buenos Aires, and you want to explore Uruguay, it's right across the river. If you want to hop over to Chile, it is just a very short flight away. So there's a lot right there. Plus, it borders Paraguay, and it's very close to Bolivia. You have a lot of things in the region. Now, of course, we skipped in one region entirely, which is the one that lies between northern South America and southern South America, the Southern Cone, and those middle countries, like the ones I just mentioned, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Peru, on their own have their own cultural region and have a lot to offer, and all of them are great countries as well. I didn't include them because all of them are a bit more difficult for someone to go visit and spend a lot of time. They tend to be less indicative of a larger region, and you are able to extrapolate them a bit from time in Colombia and time in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. And so you are not in the same position of wondering what that region is like. And if you're in both of those regions, you will probably have a chance to investigate some of them. Like we said with Nicaragua, it's very easy to go to the countries around it. Argentina, you can go to the countries immediately around it. With a little bit of doing that from Argentina and a little bit of doing that from Colombia, you will get a general feel of those countries as well. Of course, if they're specifically what you're interested in, you will probably extrapolate that from this list. But if you know that they're of the most interest to you, then you may want to include some of them or shift something around to put them onto your list. I understand this is not a hard and fast list or rules. This is for someone who doesn't know where they want to go and they want to learn about Latin America and have this really general picture that they can then build off of. That is why we have this list. Now, we've given you the 4 countries. There's one really obvious choice in Latin America that we've skipped on this list, and I'm going to hit it now. This is your bonus offering, why you may want to look at one additional country that's going to give you a lot of options. And I know all of you already know what it is. It's super obvious, but it's an important one to mention because you may want to tack on a little bit of time, maybe quite a bit of time to try to hit it. Now, if you're coming from the United States, this is not necessarily the easiest country to go to, but for a lot of people, it is pretty easy. And even for Americans, it's doable. It's just a little bit more work. And that, quite obviously, is Brazil. Brazil represents the majority on its own as a single country, the majority of the population of South America. It is not a Spanish-speaking country. So I kind of snuck this in at the beginning that we were not looking at the Lusophone countries. Brazil is unique. Speaking Portuguese makes it a bit of a challenge for a lot of people. If you're coming from North America and most of Europe, Spanish is very heavily spoken and Portuguese is not. It's not spoken. You can still hit it on Duolingo. You can find resources for it very easily. It is a widely spoken language. It is not that different from Italian and Spanish that it's not that hard to find resources for it or to hear it and find television of it and so forth. But it is not a language, especially that North Americans are going to generally have heard and learned ahead of time, so Brazil linguistically represents a bit more of a challenge. Brazil is also an extremely geographically large country and geographically disparate country. Most people are just going to picture the Amazon or Rio de Janeiro when talking about Brazil, but most people who are going to visit it and actually give it a fair shake as a region that they want to be investigating for living in as an expat are probably going to be looking more at like Porto Alegre, Florianopolis, or the countryside in the south than they are at the Amazon basin or the more famous cities of Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. But of course, if you're into the mega cities, those are going to be on your list as well. They need to be. These are some of the largest countries in the world, not just in South America. And so you want to include them if that's something you're looking at as well. Brazil has basically all the variety that you're going to find throughout the rest of South America within Brazil. So you probably want to give it a bit of time if you're going to be considering a country that speaks Portuguese. And if you just want to investigate the region and see something that is so culturally different and divergent from the rest of South America and Latin America in general, then Brazil is going to give that to you. It's an interesting bit of kind of a general part of Latin America, and obviously being Portuguese speaking, it is just as much a part of Latin America as anyone else is, but it is always isolated on its own to some degree and represents a unique experience within the region. So it is something to consider. It is a really good option that I think way too many people kind of just write off and skip over much of the time, partially because its visas are more difficult and it may be a little bit more expensive, but I don't think people really understand just how large and varied Brazil is, and basically anything you may be looking for is going to be available somewhere in Brazil. So don't just offhand disregard it as an option. It very easily could be the right option for you. You could go and simply decide that it is such well-connected and such a large industrial country with so many of its own things while still being very exotic, and maybe you just fall in love with the language or the culture, the food. Brazil should be on your list as well. Thanks for joining me. I hope that this was a meaningful and educational way of looking at Latin America. I've lived in Latin America, traveled around for a very long time. I've lived in North America and Europe as well, and I think having a framework for understanding what a region is like when you're looking to become an expat, it is sometimes tempting to just jump into a country you've heard about, and in other circumstances, we may feel a bit lost and we're not sure how to really piece together a view of such a large region. I truly believe having these countries on their own gives you the ability to really understand Latin America to a point where you can make really good decisions to hone in on your next countries. That doesn't mean you don't need to investigate more countries after this. You absolutely do in most circumstances, but you may be able to determine that North America, Central America, Northern South America, or the Southern Cone are the right regions for you, or Brazil, of course. Now, you may feel that, Peru needs to be added or Bolivia needs to be added, but those are really things you can add in your next round and say, well, I understand what weather I want, I understand what food I want. With a little bit of research or a little bit of travel from these other countries, you can probably answer those things much more quickly because you will have built up a framework in your mind for understanding the region. And that's really important. It's not that you don't want to go to Bolivia, but it means that you may be able to go to Bolivia for just 2 or 3 weeks and get a lot of value because you're able to put it into a framework of understanding that you have from having been in Colombia and having been in Argentina. And then you can say, okay, I understand how this fits and how it's part of the morphology moving between these different regions, and I can see how it connects. And then you can understand, how does the cost of living compare? How does the food compare? How does the flights compare? How does the visa access and long-term migration options compare? And by putting that together, you can understand the region and how it applies to your specific desires and needs and passport in a way that no one is going to really be able to do for you. So I think it's very valuable. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the work that we do here on the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAlanMiller. And as always, I will see all of you tomorrow.